And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Podcast, a weekly show brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. I'm here today with Mr. Garry Frog Talbert. We're welcoming back to the booth. He's laughing. It has been a while since we have had a chance to sit down and talk. We're going to be rolling into the 2021 year. We've already had a wonderful ice storm. It's been tons of fun. But how are you, sir? Honorable Chairman Garry Talbert.
I'm doing fine. I mean, we got power back yesterday morning, which was, I guess, I don't know if it's a problem with time.
No,
we got power back Wednesday morning at my house. We never lost a truck stop, so I feel fortunate compared to some individuals.
Yeah, we never lost it here. We lost internet here at the office for a little bit, but we never lost power here. I basically lived here for a couple of days with some family members and stuff because we did lose power at the house for a while. So today, gonna talk to you a little bit, try to get caught up with what's going on at the council. You know, you and I were pretty hot and heavy with it leading up until about March of last year, and then COVID happened. I had some problems at home that prevented me from coming to the meetings, and you know, y'all got some online stuff going. But we kind of want to talk about 2021. As we know, last year, little bit of tension among the council about who would be chairman. Eventually, it remained the same. Shane stayed chairman. You were co-chair or vice chair to make one councilman happy. So this year, you've been elected chairman. So how's it feel? I mean, you know, and what are you going to be doing differently?
You know, it doesn't really feel any different. I mean, you got a couple of responsibilities, just some administrative stuff that you know you need to be sure that gets handled every week. You know, but for the most part, it's not a lot different. Your responsibility as chairman really just make sure the meetings are run efficiently, and so that's my goal to try to make them as efficient as possible, and you know try to not have 2 or 3 hour meetings. We just don't have that much business that requires the meetings to get drawn out that long.
Sure, and so it's you know, meetings had started to drag out a little bit. I know that there had been some complaints from some folks, so. One of the things you are doing is trying to move through at a more brisk pace. Have you gotten any feedback on that or any concerns so far?
You know, we changed the rules at the last meeting that basically required that introductions are just introductions. We're going to introduce ordinance, and we're not going to debate it the night of introduction. We're going to introduce it, set the time for the hearing a couple of weeks later. There were a couple councilmen that were concerned. One of them, I think one councilman, you know, felt that we could, you know, there were unwanted ordinance sometimes could get killed. And I said, well, you know, maybe that's the case, but if we don't let the public comment on them, how do we know that they're really an unwanted ordinance? You know,
Sure.
As a councilman, you might want it, but the public might want it. So, you know, if we don't put it up as an opportunity for discussion, how do we really know how people feel? And another one was worried about changes. You know, sometimes we would hammer out some of the problems. You know, somebody might have a little problem with this or that in ordinance introduction, and you know, it might get changed before it was introduced, and then there would be some more debate at the public hearing. We just all agreed that if an ordinance, you know, got chopped up a lot, there was a lot of discussion at the public hearing and a bunch of amendments made that, you know, if somebody didn't feel comfortable, you know, didn't quite grasp all the changes, that we could easily defer it, you know, for another 2 weeks. And in essence, we'll still be saving some time. But you know, the ordinance committee basically, if councilmen will send what they want to do, the ordinance will hash a lot of stuff out. I know John Wascom had an introduction on a noise ordinance the other day that he bypassed the ordinance committee.
Sure.
But for the most part, everything that's been introduced as ordinance has been going through the ordinance committee, and so a lot of the councilmen have an opportunity to come speak, you know, ahead of time if they've got some concerns. The public can come talk about it. We can legally discuss what our concerns are, you know, in a public manner, without, you know, violating the sunshine laws, and have a better product when we send it to the council than one guy who has eyes on it and, you know, works through it, and then you got 8 more guys that have to look at it after the fact. And so it's just better if you do it through committee. That those ordinances seem to come with more polished, with less less concern about, how will this impact somebody? How will this impact somebody? It just seems to be more efficient if we run them all through the ordinance committee.
Sure, and we're going to get into the ordinance committee in just a second. Want to remind folks that in order for an ordinance to go through and be accepted by the council, it first has to be introduced 2 weeks before. Of course, y'all meet every first and third Thursday of the month.
Third and fourth. No, second, fourth.
Second and fourth. Excuse me. So second and fourth Thursday of the month. So if it's introduced in the second Thursday, then on the fourth Thursday they will discuss it. Of course, a lot of times, as Mr. Talbert was saying, or as Chairman Talbert was saying, it's got to come out of the Ordinance Committee. So the Ordinance Committee is, of course, a sub-board of the council. It is made up of council members, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And, one of the things that you wanted to do, a lot of times the Ordinance Committee and the Finance Committee met right before the council meeting. And a lot of times that was difficult because people were coming from, Ascension, working in a plant, or Baton Rouge, or anywhere else, and couldn't quite make it in time. So you wanted to flex the Ordinance Committee out to its own day. You accomplished that, correct?
Yeah, last year, basically, the ordinance met, I think we met almost every Tuesday. Every Tuesday, with the Tuesday, on the off week, the Tuesday of the council meeting, there was a lot of stuff. So far this year, we actually, the first meeting on the Tuesday, I think we were going to have, or the second meeting there was a conflict. So it looks like right now we're going to meet the Tuesday of the meeting week. That way we'll still have something hammered out. If we want to introduce it, we can introduce it through, the ordinance committee, comments that we have at the bottom. But yeah, I mean, and if we get to where we have a lot more stuff that we want to deal with, or something gets complicated, then, Tracy, Mr. Councilman Girlinghouse has said that we'll meet every Tuesday if we need to. But yeah, that's just it just makes it more efficient. We're not up against constraints. Typically those meetings have been an hour and 15, but last Thursday we had to meet because of a conflict on the previous Tuesday. We had to meet the morning or the day of the meeting. So we made it 5, and we had to, we know we've got to back in. So, one of the items we discussed and realized we weren't going to move very far on it, we just tabled it to another time and then moved on to the couple items that we really need to get finished in that deal. So it just makes for better discussion if you don't have something on the backside that's pressing. You know what I'm talking about? Kind of like, on a radio show, you've got a hard breaks coming up. A council meeting's a hard break. We've got to start that meeting at, the time allotted. So it just makes it more efficient and get more done if we are on a different night with a, back end time that we can go to wherever we want to.
And considering that, I mean, what are some of the, things that y'all are looking to address in the Ordinance Committee this year and as ordinances for the parish? Because we've had, there's all sorts of stuff that have come up, like solicitation ordinances, noise ordinances, which have turned into more complicated animals than previously expected.
Noise ordinances are just we fixed a noise ordinance last year. The ordinance kind of had two different different definitions of what a noise ordinance was. You measured it one spot public and one spot private, but they didn't differentiate public and private, so we did some little tweaking on that. And then, of course, the DB thing is always a problem.
Right.
So that was kind of John's thing. It's a phenomenon that's come out of COVID, is that bar rooms typically have to meet, kind of have to party outside, so to speak.
Sure.
So they end up with, live music outside and, speakers outside. And there's a little area kind of between Watson and Denham's called the Watson French Quarter, right there at the corner of Lockhart and 16. They got 3 bars in there that all technically, according to the new regulations, have temporary restaurant permits so they can open.
Sure.
But, one of them, I think, seems to be kind of playing a lot of loud music late at night. In an effort to solve it, without having to make it pretty cut and dry, the ordinance was introduced. It said no amplified music between the hours of, and I think it ended up 7 and 10, or something like 7 in the morning to 10 at night, or something that you couldn't, or 10 at night, 7 in the morning, you couldn't have a speaker outside.
Okay.
and we exempted nonprofits, ballpark. We exempted a few things because, of course, everybody's got their little pet that they want to take care of, and so we
Sure.
worried about how it impacts them. So anyway, the ordinance was written in a manner to address one particular issue, and so it was done. And it's pretty cut and dry. In discussion with the sheriff, he's like, "Yeah, it's easy now.
Mhm.
We walk up at 10:01 and you got an amplified deal outside. We write you a ticket and make you shut it down. It's easy. I don't have to go off and measure decibels and then have decibels challenged in court. And so it's just that was the reason that ordinance was introduced.
I got you. And so that's noise ordinance, and their solicitation was another one from last year.
Solicitation something that everybody hates somebody coming to your house knocking on the door. But man, there are so many exceptions. We don't want to. Schools, because of the tax situation, are always having fundraisers. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, churches selling raffle tickets. I mean, there's all kind of things that are acceptable. And it just became, every time we would start discussing it, when you looked at the list of exceptions, you know what I'm talking about, to
Yeah.
the rule, it just became,
It was longer than the law itself.
yeah. So it's just one of those things you can't, we know that there's an issue. We know there's some solicitation going on. However, there's so many exceptions, it's almost impossible to write ordinance to address those things.
Sure. What else do you think y'all are going to be trying to look at?
We looked at litter. We tried to make our parish law kind of coincide with state law, because of whatever reason. There's a group that is not interested in having that happen. They don't want constables and JPs in the litter business, even though state law allows for it now. So I was fine with that. We're just trying to make our ordinance, correspond to. So I said, well, let's just eliminate our ordinance off the books entirely. If it doesn't match state law, let's just eliminate our ordinance and let state law take the role on this thing. We don't want to do that because we really don't like state law. So, I'm just telling you, it's just one of those deals. If a constable and JP want to do what the state says, there's absolutely nothing we can do to stop it. We just have a law on the book that discourages that, but wouldn't hold water if it was challenged. So
Sure.
It's just one of those things. It's just, there's a councilman in talking about litter. There's a councilman that says the only way to eliminate litter is to go with mandatory parish-wide garbage pickup. What are some of the issues with that? The parish has no system to bill, everybody in the parish. There's, plus, I think Councilman Harris was on the police jury years ago when that was done. He said there was no stomach for it then. He doesn't think there's a stomach for it now. So, that's something that might or might not come up. Zoning is another, thing that we've talked about I remember one of the first issues we came up. I don't remember, 4.5 years ago. We're sitting there, and I'm like, zoning's a gorilla in the corner over there. If we address zoning, then we're not having all these discussions about the gun range or the gravel pit or this particular business. Is the concrete batch plant too close to my house? Or so there's some things that zoning would address and solve, and everything would be kind of cut and dry. Is it applicable throughout the parish? I don't know. The ironic thing is some of those discussions we had early on about the gun range and some of these, a bar room too close or didn't want a bar room built or whatever, those were in areas that were, fairly rural,
Right.
and it's, but the thought process is that they would not accept zoning over there. So I'm like, so what are you saying? That I can do at my property what I want to, but you can't do with your property what you want to if I don't like it? And, because it's kind of a mixed bag of things, So
Sure.
we'll just have to figure out. We'll have to figure out, is zoning something that's going to come up this year? There, technically, I guess by law, the council could vote in an ordinance for zoning, and it would become law. There's a thought process that before we impose zoning on the people in the parish, we ought to let them vote on it.
Sure.
So there's if it comes up, there'll be a lot of different, avenues that it might travel. Um, there's been discussion about the budget. Typically, if you go look at revenue that the parish collects in a millage and some other things, it's pretty low. We've got 5 mills that are dedicated to roads and road maintenance, and then I think we have 2.32 mills for the operation of parish government outside of municipality, and 1.16 with inside of municipality, which is pretty low. I mean, we've got the 1 cent sales tax, of which a quarter goes to jail and 3/4 goes to the road fund. But the only discretionary money that exists is that 2.32 mills. The Constitution, the state Constitution, grants parishes 5 mills outside of municipality, 2.5 inside of municipality. In the past, old police juries and councilmen chose to roll back, when we had a millage increase, roll it back. And so now we can't provide some basic services that other parishes provide because our millages roll back so much. I mean, it almost like we play games with the budget to legally spend money in particular areas that if we were properly funded, that we could just, provide the service that was required. But whether the ordinance committee or the finance committee want to take some of those things up this year will be it's their decision, what they want to move forward with.
Sure. So, want to separate. We're going to dovetail here because there's 2 different conversations to have. One is, let's start with the zoning that you already brought up. There was a master plan committee that was sort of brought together to rediscuss the master plan that was approved by resolution, which is non-binding. That was in 2013. What happened to that group? I know COVID kind of pushed them off the rails.
Yeah, I think that, I guess it depends on what the committee wanted to discuss. I mean, when I'm going to be honest with you, we called it the master plan. We called it that committee. But I really thought we were going to figure out how to put in, implement zoning. That was the deal. And then the first thing they did is determine that the master plan is old and it's not really applicable. It's probably a document that needs to constantly be updated. You know what I'm talking about? So they start looking for funding. Well, heck, I mean, the previous council administration had spent a bunch of money, getting it done. I'm sorry, but they are blowing my phone up. Had spent a bunch of money getting it implemented, and then or put together, and then couldn't implement it themselves. When it was an accurate, document.
Sure.
And then we get an older document, and it's a lot of things have changed. Really, to implement the master plan as it is would require a pretty substantial piece of money, a little chunk of change, because you need to take some properties out of commerce so that you're going to project road corridors and some other things. There's some stuff that's kind of costly about it, but there's some other things that could be implemented without a lot of cost. And I talk about zoning because it's something that comes up constantly. We're looking at people are bringing waivers. They're we want to do this and it doesn't really allow us. And if we had zoning, it would eliminate a lot of stuff. They talk about people in the rural don't want it. There is a rural zoning. EBR has got rural zoning as an example. Other parishes that have zoning have rural zoning. And rural zoning, you can do a lot with rural zoning. You can do almost anything in rural zoning you can do somewhere else. When it comes to family development, like residential, the densities are different. So that you don't, so it doesn't really allow for apartment complexes and that kind of stuff. But the number of homes per acre changes in rural, in a lot of these parishes that allow for a subdivision to be developed in a rural area, just the density is different. You can still build businesses in rural. I think there's some restriction on some of the industrial stuff. So where they talked about the concrete blacks plant probably would be impacted in rural and had to be rezoned. You know what I'm saying? But So it would really protect those individuals that lived in rural areas from negative things that they have, come to not want in their area when they come to the council and talk to us. So I think a lot of it's about education. I think you got to put a plan together. You're going to get a lot of heat while you're developing it, while you're writing it, put it together and then present it. Go around the parish and present it and talk about, somebody says, well, I have so-and-so acres here. If I wanted to do this, how would it affect me? And you're going to find out probably 90% of the time, it's not going to affect you at all.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But, people don't understand that. And, there'll be a period of time as I see it. And, I'm just one of 9 people that if you enacted that ordinance and then gave every piece of property some designation, rural, residential, and residential's probably got 3 or 4 different categories, commercial, industrial. I mean, and then commercial's got, different, areas within it. Then say, okay, since by a letter, this is how your property's zoned. Then they got to have a period of time to challenge it. Come before the council and say, look, I don't think that's really what my property's best used for. And talk about it. But that's something that'll be a process. And what I was hoping that the master plan committee was going to do was kind of do a lot of that legwork on, putting the stuff together. I guess kind of as a buffer for the council. Put it together, bring it to the council, let the council look at the final package, and then start have that committee present it to the people around the parish and get feedback. And then I think that would be the easiest process toward, getting that accomplished. I think it just kind of got bogged down in the mud. Somebody told me a long time ago that a committee was a place where great ideas went and died. And so, believe it or not, I've seen it, in the last 4.5 years a couple times. And so hopefully this thing gets back on track. Hopefully it gets moving in a different direction. I think that's kind of why Randy put that, Citizens Drainage Committee together, is an effort to, look at parish-wide drainage problems, how to probably look at instituting parish-wide drainage or how to solve, some parish-wide issues. And I think that's, kind of how that came about, to specifically not get bogged down in a lot of mud,
Sure.
be centered on one idea. And I think initially in the conversation, I think they plan on moving around different areas. I think they're going to have a meeting here one time and there somewhere else and give the public an opportunity to come talk about the issues they've got. We got a little money in the Go Mesa surplus. We asked through resolution that if we could utilize that money, if this committee found some funding, that we could utilize that money in a match,
Sure.
for the implementation of it at a parish level. And I think, we'll be able to get, let them meet, let them talk about, what the concerns are. Is there a way to implement parish-wide, drainage? Would a parish-wide master plan be good and create areas that, have different requirements for, how construction's done? Do we need to, have different rules with respect to, drainage impact studies in different areas of the parish? Because typically what works in Watson might not work down, in Maurepas or French Settlement, because the conditions are different, so retaining water down there isn't always a solution or an option, and so it doesn't really necessarily work. Where up in, Watson, typically we try to retain it and let it go at a slower rate because there's so much downstream from us. Excuse me. And so, that's kind of, that's hopefully some of the things that come out of that committee.
Sure. So I want to switch over to finance because one of the things you talked about was the budget. And, first of all, I would like for you to take about, 30 seconds and describe for, the audience, what do you, obviously millages are rolled forward, they're rolled back. Give us a brief sort of description on how that process works.
Okay. So typically, every 3 years or something, we have a reassessment. and millages come before, be a major millage adjustment throughout the parish. Typically, when that happens, if you have a millage, let's say, for example, you got 5 mills and you were collecting $1 million, and then they have a reassessment and everything takes a bump in property values, and all of a sudden that million becomes 1.2 million. The person that's collecting that millage has two options. They can roll it forward to 5 mills and get the additional money, or they can adjust it back to 1 million, which would lower the millage. Typically what's been happening is that, or what happened back in the police jury, is if there was an increase in revenue, they rolled the millage back. Right. So if they were getting $500,000 in revenue and it went up, we just rolled the millage back to go back to another $500,000. Well, typically, they had different revenue streams. They own the landfill at that time, so they got a little royalty. What time they got? They got additional revenues. I think there were less services that need to be provided. There were less people. Less infrastructure to be maintained. So anyway, for whatever reason, it happened. When I sat on the Rec District 2 board, and we had an increase in millage, when the revenue went up, my thought process was, what made it go up? Is it strictly an increase in property values? Because typically, we're not having a lot of inflation right now. So, if you have a big jump, it's because you got more houses. If you got more houses, you got more people. More people require more services. So typically, to service more people is going to cost more money. So we always rolled, the couple times we had the option, we rolled our millage back up to what the people voted in instead of taking the less revenue. Because ultimately, if you have more people living in your community and you're having to provide more services, it's going to cost more money. So
sure.
Then that's kind of what's happened to Livingston Parish. We're a bedroom community. So we don't have a lot of industry. So our revenue is going to come from sales tax and millage. Well, the sales tax we get's dedicated. So the only revenue we have that's discretionary is a millage. And so, there's some thought that we probably ought to get what constitutionally comes to us. The question is, when you go tell people we're going to bump your millage up 2.68 mils, you better tell them what you're going to spend the money on.
Sure.
And you better have a laid out plan of why this is beneficial. Are we going to do something in such a manner that, where the road fund's paying for some stuff that maybe should be paid by the 5 mills, the discretionary millage, that you're going to get additional money for roads and maintenance. They're just got to, are we going to fund animal control? Or are we going to, we're going to do a better job picking up garbage? What are we going to do with this additional revenue? You better have a plan laid out of what that money's going to be for, be utilized for, or you're going to get a tremendous amount of backlash. And so that's the one thing that I have learned in 4.5 years is that, people want you to be a caretaker of their dollars. They don't want to pay any more taxes than they have to. And some services are not important to them. Sure. And so, you better have your duckies in a row if you decide to roll that millage up to 5.
So, you brought up a couple of things from your standpoint, your opinion. What would be some things that you think the council would agree upon as a push to try to roll this forward in terms of services?
I think start off with it. You got to some of these administrative budget items that we have within these funds need to be pulled out. Pull them out of the funds, and if somebody voted for 3/4 of a millage, 0.75% of sales tax to be used on roads, we need to use it on roads. We don't need to fund, the administration of that deal with it. So, that's just my opinion. I know why we're doing it now, but that doesn't necessarily make it, the best thing. And I think if you could show people where their benefit is, that they would be understanding. Look, they supported the road tax because they understood the importance of it. It's our job then to be a good caretaker of those dollars.
So It's interesting because one of the things that sort of came up with the you know, let's call it what it is. The vote was moved on the road tax to the fall to try to get better turnout. It was passed by such a margin that in Livingston Parish, I think you'd almost call it a mandate.
Oh,
And so the idea being, you brought something up that I'm glad you said is that part of that road fund goes to DPW, and part of it goes towards administrative costs, at least with regard to the millage. The idea, and you try to bring this whole picture together of that tax collection, and that when you think about the new roads that are built, when new subdivisions come, when new homes come to the area, you can't keep rolling back to a certain revenue amount because you have more people, you have more of a burden, as you mentioned. So would that be up to the council? Would it be up to the finance committee to come up with some kind of plan to move forward with trying to roll that millage forward? And what would be the sales pitch there?
I think the finance number one would have to figure out what the revenue stream. Where if we roll up to 5 mills, how much money are we talking about? You know what I'm talking about? And then look at those dollars and figure out where those dollars could best be spent. First off, the first thing I do is I go look at every one of those funds: jail fund, health unit fund, uh, road fund, and figure out where we're taking money out of them, and look at replacing that money with that other millage initially. Just say, and then just say we're going to utilize your dollars on what you asked us to utilize them for. And then if there's a surplus behind that, then figure out where it could best be utilized. Um, you know, what is most important? Is it taking that money to be utilized in areas that necessarily doesn't have funded gravity drainage to do work? And then they go, well, what about the areas that do have gravity? Are we going to utilize some of it over there? I think the finance committee needs to look at, number one, what's there, and then with the administration's help, needs to figure out the best place to spend that money, and then figure out, is it something that's palatable to the citizens of the parish? Because ultimately, it's kind of like a tax increase. You're putting a tax increase on them. It's a tax increase that you're constitutionally allowed, but you are raising the cost. You'd have to figure out what's the average impact to a person. There's a lot to it. You just can't just say, "Oh, I'm gonna roll it up to 5 and we're gonna go on down the road." You better be able to know what it's gonna cost somebody, show them what you're gonna spend it on, and make sure that they're comfortable with that.
Sure.
So I think the ordinance got to start with that situation with the help from the administration.
Okay. So you think it'll go through ordinance?
I mean, no, I said finance needs to start with that with help from the administration. I'm
Right.
sorry.
And you talked a little bit about you need the support from the administration to be able to move forward with things like this. But you have had discussions with the administration about the idea, and we're going to talk more about this piece of it when we get into the infrastructure podcast, which is coming up after this, by the way, folks. I'll remind you again at the end. But you have talked to the administration about the fact that you believe, and there are council members that are with you on this belief, that the funding that's going to the administration coming out of the road program, there has to be a path forward to remove that.
Yeah, I think given our current financial situation, I know why we're doing it. I understand. Uh, I just think that we told people we're going to use this fund to fix roads, and I think that's what we need to do. And so I think we need to find a way to slowly wean ourselves, out of those funds. Technically, what we're doing is legal. There's no doubt about that. But I think we need to find a way to not do it. And
Sure.
so, hopefully, we're able to figure out other revenue streams to eliminate that particular situation.
So last thing, and you brought this up already. It was kind of an interesting way to put it. You talked about people have their little pet things that they want to protect. And one of the things that has recently come up through the paper, we did a story on this in the paper last week, is that the council is partnering with both Buddy Mincy Jr. and Sherman Mack to expand 2 boards here in the parish, the Convention and Visitors Bureau Board as well as Water District 2. You're kind of involved in both of those in a certain way, shape, and form. Of course, we'll start with the CVB, which right now is a 7-member board, but you have 9 parish councilmen. And of course, the 2 that are left off actually have 2 pretty interesting and relevant tourist attractions. That would be yourself in District 2 up in the Watson area. You have Tiki Tubing, and of course, you already brought up your rec district. And then, of course, Scooter Keene has North Park, the golf course, that sort of thing. So talk to us a little bit about how this process began.
Well, it's kind of a funny deal. Actually, Mr. Gerlinghouse's appointment has actually moved to Watson. So he technically lives in District 2 now. but it's always been that, when you looked, when we first got appointed, we first got elected, we went and looked at boards. There's 7 boards. You look at where 2 and 3 didn't have an appointment. It's just kind of the way it was. I didn't really think much about it. And then as you realize more about what the convention, what the Bureau does, and you like, it would be nice to get some promotion, in the Watson area. So just in discussions, we just kind of felt that it was time that every councilman had an appointment. Plus there's no cost. I mean, it's not like those people get paid per diem, to go to a meeting. There was no additional cost on the board. Typically, if they go to a convention and 2 or 3 travel, then they're not taking all 9 of them anyway. So,
Sure.
If 2 or 3 travel, whether it's your 2 or 3 or somebody else's 2 or 3, there's no additional cost. And so it was a board, it was a decision that was kind of easy to make.
I got you. And, before we get to water too, one of the things that sort of to confirm is that y'all figured out throughout the process that you have to go through the legislature to expand a local board.
Yeah, if those boards were created by act of the legislature, then the only way to expand them is to have the legislature, do a local exception bill, and those have timing associated with them. So sometimes we would pass the ordinance or resolution requesting it, and it wouldn't happen in the proper time frame. So that's kind of what happened on the CVB board, is that that we passed it. It was too late to do the advertising, file the bill, on the local exception. So we waited to this year, which is a fiscal deal, so there's a limit. But local bills can still, Representative Mincy had made room for us. And then all he asked is that we reaffirm, to make sure that the 9 members still wanted to move forward. So we did that at the last meeting.
Sure. And Water District 2 is also facing a bit of expansion. That is because of the purchase of the French Settlement Water Company and the expansion down south. It started to take in customers that were in districts that had previously not been represented. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Ward 2 Water is probably the largest rural water company in the state. And they're fiscally sound, great run water board. They recently bought Port Vincent, basically because Port Vincent was in trouble with their water situation. They've acquired part of French Settlement Water District, not inside the city limits, but they've acquired part of it. And so anyway, basically what happens, there's been 5 members on that board. Historically, 3 of them been appointed out of Council District 2, 2 of them been appointed out of Council District 1. Even though they approached Council District 3 and had some in Council District 4. With some of these acquisitions, they're now in Council District 6, 5. I think 6 and 5 is basically where they've done. Anyway.
Also, a few in the outskirts of 4 because.
Well, I think they've had some in 4 all along. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, just and the ironic thing is we've got reapportionment coming up, so who knows what districts are going to be in next time.
Sure.
But, so when that thing moves around, my district's going to shrink. because of, I think I've got the largest district anyway right now, population wise. There's been a lot of growth in District 6. So who knows how that's going to work out. But anyway.
A lot of growth in District 5 as well.
Right. So anyway, given that situation, John put forth to expand the board from 5 to 7. The board, the way the law's been written at the legislature, gives 5 members appointed by the council, which we've had all along, and the 2 additional members will be appointed by any municipality that the water district encompasses. So this law that we reaffirmed, me being the only no vote, last meeting, allows the village of Port Vincent to appoint 2 board members. That's 29% of the board will be voted out of the village of Port Vincent. The water company acquired them because they had a defunct water company.
Right.
I hate to say it, there are probably a couple of rural water companies that are one lightning strike away in this parish from not being able to service their customers. And Ward 2 is available, and have been in negotiation with some other rural water companies. It's kind of an ironic thing that you've run your business well, you've provided great services, you've grown, expanded towers, put wells in, created redundancy throughout the area. And now all of a sudden we're gonna expand the board and kind of politicize it. I didn't have a problem with the expansion to 7. I have a problem with the way the expansion's going.
Sure.
And so what they reaffirmed was that they asked the legislature that all 7 members be appointed by the council. But at the same time, if the legislature doesn't change the laws that's being introduced, then if it's voted in that way, the village of Port Vincent will get 2 additional members. And then they said, well, we'll just change it the next year. It seems to me you ought to get it right the first time. But look, I was in the minority on that thing, so it is what it is.
So that'll end up being an interesting story going forward, I am sure. But it sounds like y'all are in complete agreement about the CVB being.
Oh yeah, it was unanimous. Everybody was agreeable.
So moving forward, we did talk a little bit about some of the drainage stuff. We're going to get into the Citizens Drainage Council in the next podcast. Mr. Garry Frog Talbert and I are going to take a break. Honorable Chairman Garry Frog Talbert. But again, we appreciate you guys joining us, kind of getting an idea of what the council is going to be looking at going through the 2021 year. Hopefully, as we move through COVID, going to get back more towards the normal council meetings. So again, we appreciate you, sir, for taking the time. Again, he and I are about to take a break. We appreciate you guys joining us for the Livingston Parish News Podcast, a podcast brought to you by LPN. It's a weekly deal. You can find us online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. You can find the podcast on all podcast platforms. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. Check us out there. Please be looking for this. This is going to come out. You'll be listening to it Thursday afternoon, maybe. If you're listening to it later, then you'll probably be able to jump right into the second one, which is going to come out on Friday. Again, we appreciate you joining us, and we will see you next time.